Hey everyone. In this video, we're walking through every question in Module 1 of Practice Test number 11. That's 25 questions. For each one, I'll read the passage, show the question, pause so you can think, then walk through every wrong answer and finish with the correct one. Question 1 of 25. We're jumping straight in with a medium. Here's the passage. The blank describes how the committee saw the engineer's report. The clue follows the colon. In a field famous for jargon, she explained a complex bridge failure in plain language any council member could follow. We need a word that captures that clarity. The choices range from clear to confusing, technical, tedious, lucid, and evasive. Because the report is praised for being readable to anyone, we want a word meaning easy to understand, not one suggesting density, dullness, or dodging the point. Technical means full of specialized terms, the opposite of the plain language praised. Tedious means boring, which is not what earns the committee's praise. Evasive means avoiding directness, contradicting a clear, forthright report. Choice C, lucid, means clear and easy to understand. That fits perfectly with explaining a complex failure in plain language anyone could follow, which is exactly what earns the committee's admiration. Question 2 of 25. Now it gets harder. Here's the passage. The passage describes a playwright the critic admires for refusing to do something to his characters, since even the villain gets a private logic and a wound that lets the audience understand him. We need the word that captures what the playwright avoids doing. The clue is that the playwright grants depth to everyone, even the villain. So the blank must name the opposite action, reducing characters to something thin and simple, because that is what he refuses to do. Develop contradicts the sentence, since the playwright clearly does develop his characters rather than refuse to. Praise does not fit, because granting a villain logic and a wound is understanding him, not praising him. Introduce merely means to present and fails to capture reducing characters to simple types. Choice B, flatten, means to reduce a character to a simple one-dimensional figure. Refusing to flatten matches the evidence perfectly. The playwright gives even the villain logic and a wound, adding the very dimension that flattening would strip away. Question 3 of 25. Staying in hard territory. Here's the passage. The sentence describes a documentary that complicates its subject at every turn, refusing to let viewers settle into a comfortable verdict about the dam. The question asks for the word or phrase that most logically and precisely completes the blank. The phrase, far from being a account, sets up a contrast with how the film actually behaves. Since the documentary resists a simple, comfortable conclusion, the blank needs a word meaning neat and uncomplicated, the very quality the film rejects. Lengthy refers to duration, not to the simplicity the sentence contrasts against complication. Truthful fails the contrast, since complicating a subject is not opposed to being truthful. Recent refers to time and is unrelated to the film's refusal to simplify. The answer is A, tidy. A tidy account would be neat and simple, offering an easy verdict. Because the film instead complicates its subject and denies viewers a settled conclusion, calling it far from tidy captures that contrast precisely. Question 4 of 25, a medium after that. Here's the passage. The passage is about urban design, and it claims that traffic depends not only on the number of cars, but also on the shape of a city. The question asks which choice best states the main purpose of the text. The choices range across banning cars, listing design steps, pointing to city layout as a cause of traffic, and declaring congestion unfixable. We need the option that captures the writer's central point rather than a narrow detail or an overstated claim. A miss reads the text, which never calls for banning or reducing cars and instead emphasizes city shape. B is wrong because the passage offers no step-by-step instructions for designing a downtown. D contradicts the text, which proposes a way to ease congestion rather than calling it impossible to reduce. C fits because the text directly argues that a city's layout, not just car numbers, shapes traffic, noting that scattering offices, shops, and schools lets the same cars move without converging into gridlock. That matches the purpose of stressing design over sheer car count. Question 5 of 25. Staying at medium, here's the passage. The passage describes Aunt Vera, who never raised her voice yet could quiet a room with a raised eyebrow or a deliberate pause. The question asks what the underlined sentence about her small gestures silencing arguing relatives does for the text as a whole. We need the choice that captures the sentence's function, not just a stray detail. The text builds a portrait of a woman whose subtle, quiet actions carry enormous influence, so we want an option that ties the gestures to that effect. The sentence never describes any specific argument among the relatives. It speaks generally about her effect. The text offers no criticism of Aunt Vera as unfriendly to guests. It admires her composure. Nothing in the sentence explains why the relatives came to visit. B fits because the sentence explains the effect of Aunt Vera's subtle gestures, stating they silence a room more completely than any shout. That comparison emphasizes that her quiet authority was unusually powerful, which is exactly the impression the passage develops. Question 6 of 25. Now it gets harder. Here's the passage. The passage examines how scientific discovery actually unfolds, contrasting the neat image of a forward march with the messy reality recorded in a chemist's notebooks. The question asks which choice best describes the overall structure of the text. The choices describe 4 different organizing patterns: a chronological list of discoveries, a comparison of 2 chemists, a how-to set of instructions, and a setup then reversal in which a familiar belief is challenged. We need the one that matches how the text is actually built. The text does not list a chemist's discoveries in the order they occurred. It offers scattered examples to make a point. No 2 chemists' careers are compared at all. The text gives no instructions for keeping a lab notebook. It only cites notebooks as evidence. Choice D fits cleanly. The text opens with a common assumption that discovery is a straight march forward, then overturns it with messy evidence of wrong ideas, accidents, and ignored results, ending by reframing progress as a stumble that happened to move ahead. Question 7 of 25. Staying in hard territory. Here's the passage. The passage gives a narrator who recalls a childhood home that has been sold and torn down, yet who still walks its rooms in memory. The question asks which choice best states the main idea of the text. Each option summarizes the passage differently, so we look for the one that captures its central claim rather than a single detail. The text dwells on remembered features and ends by saying, "A place can outlast its demolition so long as someone keeps walking through it." The text never focuses on why the house was sold, so regret is not the main idea. No plan to rebuild the home appears anywhere in the passage. Details like the groaning stair are fond memories, not complaints about poor construction. Choice A states that a demolished home can endure through memory. Though the house is physically gone, the narrator still moves through its rooms in his mind, and the final sentence makes that very idea explicit, matching the passage's main point exactly. Question 8 of 25, back to an easier one. Here's the passage. The question asks which choice best states the main idea of a text about the tardigrade, or water bear, a tiny animal that survives conditions deadly to nearly every other creature. The passage lists what the tardigrade endures, being frozen, boiled, dried out for years, and even exposed to the vacuum of space, then notes it revives when conditions improve. We need the choice that captures this overall toughness rather than one stray detail. Space is only one example of what tardigrades endure, not the sole place they can live. The text says they survive being dried out for years, so they do not need constant moisture. The passage presents the tardigrade as remarkably tough, not as fragile. B fits because the text emphasizes the tardigrade's extraordinary ability to survive extreme conditions that would kill almost any other animal, which is exactly the main idea the passage builds toward. Question 9 of 25. Stepping up to a medium. Here's the passage. The passage describes how archaeologists uncovered drains, sewers, and public baths in an ancient city, then revised their view of its people. The question asks which choice best states the main idea of the text. The choices split between describing the city as crude, focusing on construction order, recognizing an advanced society, or claiming the people ignored health. We need the option that captures the central shift in understanding the discovery produced. Choice A reverses the point, since the text says earlier scholars who assumed the city was crude were proven wrong. Choice B fixates on a step-by-step construction order the passage never discusses. Choice D contradicts the text, which highlights a strong concern for public health rather than its absence. Choice C fits because the sophisticated water system led scholars to abandon their low opinion and recognize advanced engineering and concern for public health. That revision from crude settlement to sophisticated society is exactly the central point the text builds toward. Question 10 of 25. Here's an easier one. Here's the passage. The question asks which finding would most directly support a student's hypothesis. She predicts that quiet instrumental music helps people focus while studying, but music with lyrics distracts because the words compete with reading. To support this claim, the right finding has to track both halves of it, instrumental music helping and lyrics hurting. We can compare each option against that two-part contrast rather than against focus in general. A says students focused best in complete silence, which says nothing about the instrumental versus lyric comparison the hypothesis depends on. B says students focused better when music had lyrics, which directly contradicts the claim that lyrics distract. C says focus worsened as music grew louder, but volume is not the distinction the hypothesis draws. D states that students read better with instrumental music, but worse with lyrics. This matches both predictions at once, confirming that instrumental music aids focus while lyrics distract, so it is the most direct support. Question 11 of 25. Stepping up to a medium, here's the passage. The passage describes a historian who argues that a medieval town's prosperity came mainly from its weekly market. The question asks which finding, if true, would most strongly support that claim by tying the town's wealth specifically to market activity. We need the option that directly links the town's prosperity to its market rather than to some unrelated cause. The strongest evidence will show wealth-tracking market activity, while weaker options point to other possible sources of prosperity. A nearby silver mine suggests a separate source of wealth, undercutting rather than supporting the claim. The town's age does not connect its prosperity specifically to the market. A famous cathedral points to a different draw, not to market activity. Choice B works because records showing the town's wealth rose and fell with the size of its weekly market create a direct correlation between prosperity and market activity. When market size and wealth move together, that pattern ties the town's fortunes to the market itself, which is exactly what the historian needs. Question 12 of 25. Now it gets harder. Here's the passage. The passage describes an ecologist who thinks deer grazing keeps a meadow diverse by eating the fastest-growing grasses, so no single species takes over. The question asks which finding, if true, would most strongly support that hypothesis. Strong support means evidence that removing the deer reduces variety, while the grazing mechanism holds. We can weigh each choice against that prediction, watching for results that confirm grazing protects diversity rather than ones that contradict or sidestep it. Plots without deer gaining more species contradicts the prediction that removal lowers diversity. Deer eating wildflowers rather than grasses undercuts the hypothesized grazing mechanism. A steady deer count over years reveals nothing about their effect on diversity. Choice A fits exactly. Fenced plots that exclude deer become dominated by a few grasses and lose diversity, which is precisely what the ecologist predicts. Without grazing, fast-growing species crowd out the rest. This directly confirms that the deer maintain the meadow's variety. Question 13 of 25. a medium after that. Here's the passage. The passage explains why fish survive winter even though a lake's surface freezes solid. Because water grows denser as it cools but turns lighter as it becomes ice, the ice floats and forms an insulating lid while liquid water stays below. We need the choice that most logically completes that inference. Each option draws a conclusion about the ice, the water, or the fish. The right answer must follow directly from the chain the text builds. Floating ice acts as an insulating lid, and liquid water remains underneath to support life. The text says liquid water remains below, so the lake does not freeze solid all the way down. The passage states ice is lighter than the water beneath, not denser. The text presents the floating ice as helpful to the fish, not as something that dooms them. Choice C states that the floating ice helps fish survive by insulating the water below. This matches the passage exactly, which describes the ice forming an insulating lid so that liquid water and life remains beneath it. Question 14 of 25. Now it gets harder. Here's the passage. The passage describes how people who know a place too well give worse directions than strangers, because experts skip the small landmarks and turns a newcomer needs. The question asks which choice most logically completes the claim that deep familiarity can sometimes do something. We need a completion that matches the evidence. The experts still know the route, but they communicate it poorly. The right answer should focus on the difficulty of explaining the way to someone unfamiliar, not on forgetting or failing to arrive. A says experts forget how to reach a place themselves, but the passage states they knew the way too well, so their knowledge stays intact. C claims familiarity prevents strangers from ever learning a route, yet the strangers actually worked it out, and the point is about explaining to others. D says people fail to arrive, but the finding concerns the quality of directions, not whether anyone reaches the destination. B fits exactly. The experts gave worse directions because their familiarity led them to leave out the steps a beginner needs, so deep familiarity can make it harder to explain something clearly to a beginner. That captures the contrast between knowing the route and conveying it. Question 15 of 25. Back to an easier one. Here's the passage. The text describes a science fair drawing students from every grade, with projects filling 3 gymnasiums. The question asks which punctuation completes the sentence according to standard English conventions. The blank sits between 2 complete thoughts, one about the fair drawing students and one about the projects filling the gymnasiums. Each could stand alone as its own sentence, so we need punctuation strong enough to separate 2 independent clauses. A comma between 2 complete sentences creates a comma splice. No punctuation lets the 2 clauses crash together as a run-on. A colon signals a list or explanation, but the second clause is just a separate statement. Choice B places a semicolon after school, and a semicolon is built precisely for linking 2 closely related independent clauses without a conjunction. Both halves are full sentences, and the semicolon joins them cleanly while keeping their connection. Question 16 of 25. Another easy one. Here's the passage. The sentence states that a recipe required 3 uncommon spices, then names them: saffron, star anise, and dried lime. The question asks which punctuation correctly joins that introduction to the list, following the conventions of standard English. Each option offers the same word with different punctuation: a comma, a semicolon, a colon, or nothing at all. The key is what comes before and after. The opening is a complete sentence, and what follows is a list of items. So we need the mark designed to introduce a list after an independent clause. A uses a comma, which is too weak to introduce the list that follows. B uses a semicolon, but a list rather than an independent clause follows it. D leaves out punctuation, running the sentence directly into the list. Choice C, the colon, is correct, because a colon follows a complete sentence to introduce the list of spices that explains 3 uncommon. It signals that examples are coming, which is exactly the relationship between the clause and the 3 named items. Question 17 of 25. Stepping up to a medium, here's the passage. The sentence describes a lighthouse keeper who had lived alone on the island for 30 years, and the question asks which punctuation completes the text according to standard English conventions. Notice that the clause, who had lived alone on the island for 30 years, is non-essential, and it already opens with a comma after keeper. Whatever mark fills the blank has to close that same interrupting clause so the main idea can continue. A semicolon cannot close a non-essential clause that was opened with a comma. With no punctuation, the interrupting clause is never closed. A colon introduces a list or explanation, not the close of a parenthetical clause. Choice A, years, is correct because its comma pairs perfectly with the opening comma to enclose the non-essential clause. With both commas in place, the clause is set off cleanly, and the sentence reads smoothly into knew every rock and current along the coast. Question 18 of 25. Here's an easier one. Here's the passage. The sentence describes a flock of geese moving over a lake each evening, and the question asks which verb keeps it consistent with standard English conventions. The key is finding the true subject and matching the verb to it. The subject is the collective noun flock, which is singular. The phrase of geese sits between the subject and the verb, tempting us toward a plural, but it cannot change the number of the subject. We need a singular finite present tense verb. Circle is plural and wrongly agrees with geese rather than the singular subject flock. Have circled is plural and shifts to the perfect tense, disagreeing with the singular subject. Circling is not a finite verb and cannot serve as the main verb. Choice B, circles, works because the singular collective noun flock takes a singular verb. The plural geese is only part of an intervening prepositional phrase, so it does not govern agreement here. Question 19 of 25. Stepping up to a medium. Here's the passage. The question asks which verb completes the sentence so it follows the conventions of standard English, focusing on subject-verb agreement and tense in a sentence about climbers carrying an emergency beacon. The grammatical subject is each, which is singular even though the plural noun climbers sits right next to the verb. The phrase, no matter how experienced they were, signals a past tense context, so we need a singular past tense verb. Where is plural and wrongly agrees with climbers rather than the singular subject each. Are is plural present tense, disagreeing with both the singular subject and the past context. Have been is plural and fails to agree with the singular subject each. Choice A, was, is correct because the singular subject each takes a singular verb and the past tense matches the established time frame, regardless of the plural climbers that follows. Question 20 of 25. Another medium, here's the passage. The sentence describes two past events, the rescue team arriving and the hikers building a shelter beforehand. The question asks which verb form correctly completes the text in standard English. The choices offer forms of have, present perfect has and have, past perfect had, and the participle having. The key is matching a plural subject and an action completed before another past moment. Has is singular present perfect, clashing with the plural subject and the past time frame. Have is present perfect and does not fit the clearly past context. Having is a participle, not a finite verb, so it cannot be the main verb. Choice C, had, is correct because the past perfect shows the hikers built the shelter before the later past event of the team's arrival, placing the two actions in their proper order on the timeline. Question 21 of 25. Here's an easier one. Here's the passage. The text describes a bakery that sells out of bread by noon every day, after which the owner decides to bake twice as many loaves each morning. The question asks which transition most logically connects these two sentences. We can map the relationship first. The second sentence describes the owner's response to the constant sellouts. That is a cause and effect link, so we want a transition that signals result, not contrast or illustration. however, signals contrast, but the decision follows logically from selling out rather than opposing it. For example signals an illustration, yet the second sentence is a consequence, not an example. Nevertheless, signals an unexpected reversal, which does not fit a sensible response to demand. Choice C therefore fits because baking more loaves is the direct result of selling out by noon. The shortage causes the decision and therefore precisely marks that consequence. Question 22 of 25, and now a hard one. Here's the passage. The passage describes a survey where residents strongly backed expanding the bus system, but support collapsed once a tax increase was proposed to pay for it. The question asks which transition most logically connects these two ideas. The relationship hinges on a reversal. Enthusiasm was high, then it fell once a cost appeared. We need a word that signals contrast rather than agreement, addition, or cause and effect. Therefore, signals a result, but falling support does not logically follow from strong initial support. Similarly, signals agreement, yet the two findings pull against each other. In addition, adds a similar point, but the second sentence reverses the first instead of extending it. Choice A, yet fits, because the sharp drop in support directly contradicts the initial overwhelming enthusiasm, and the sentence even notes how conditional that enthusiasm turned out to be. A contrast word captures that pivot precisely. Question 23 of 25. Back to an easier one. Here's the passage. The student's notes describe the monarch butterfly's yearly migration from Canada and the United States to central Mexico, a trip so long that no single butterfly finishes it. The question asks which choice best uses the notes to emphasize that the migration spans multiple generations. The goal is specific. We need the sentence that foregrounds the multi-generational nature of the journey, not just the distance, the destination, or the direction. So we look for the option that ties together the idea that one butterfly cannot complete the trip and that several generations are required. It states only the distance traveled, not the multi-generational point. It names the destination but says nothing about generations. It describes the route but omits the generational span entirely. Choice C does exactly that. By stating that because no single monarch completes the round trip, the migration takes several generations of butterflies, it directly highlights the generational span the student wants to stress, combining both relevant details from the notes. Question 24 of 25. Stepping up to a medium, here's the passage. The notes describe Hilma af Klint, who painted abstract works around 1906, years before the artists usually credited as the first abstract painters. The question asks which choice best uses the notes to explain why her pioneering role went unrecognized for so long. The goal is specific. We need a cause for the delayed recognition, not just a fact about her or her work. The right answer must point to something that kept her contribution hidden from view. A states only the date of her work, not why she was overlooked. C notes she preceded others, but never explains the delay in recognition. D describes the style of her paintings rather than any reason for the neglect. Choice B works because it ties the overlooked role directly to her own request that the paintings stay hidden for decades after her death. That concealment is exactly what would delay recognition, so it answers the questions why. Question 25 of 25. Last one, a medium. Here's the passage. The question asks which choice best uses the student's notes to emphasize the importance of coral reefs despite their small size. The goal has two parts. The answer must signal both how little space reefs occupy and how much they accomplish. The notes give us a size statistic, a fact about marine species, a point about food fish, and a point about coastline protection. To hit the goal, we need a sentence that pairs the smallness with a striking benefit, creating a clear contrast. B states only that reefs protect coastlines, never mentioning their small size, so no contrast appears. C notes that food fish depend on reefs, but says nothing about how much reefs matter relative to their size. D gives just the size statistic and omits any reason reefs are important. Choice A does exactly that. It sets the reef's tiny share of the ocean floor against the large share of marine species they shelter, so the word though frames a direct contrast between small size and outsized impact. That's all 25 questions for Module 1. Pause the video and count up how many you got right. If you found this helpful, like and subscribe. I post full walkthroughs like this for every practice test. Good luck on test day. You've got this.